My name is Charlie Roberto. I'm the captain of Ladder Company 26. We're quartered on Fifth Avenue between 115th Street and 112th Street. We've been together with 58 engine for over 50 years. Back in the old days, a lot of firehouses were single houses, so the old quarters for a 26 truck the street doesn't even exist anymore. It's in the middle of the projects off of Madison Avenue. 58 engine used to be quartered up on 115th Street between 5th and Lenox. And we were moved in together back in the 50s. Ladder 26 was formed in 1904, and 58 engine was formed in 1893, and have been serving Harlem ever since. Historically, both companies are two of the busiest companies in the world, and presently we do around 5,500 runs, and the engine does about 6,000 runs. Things have changed since I've been here. I've been a captain of 26 for 20 years. I've seen a lot of changes. The neighborhood is, I call it upper Midtown now. And we went to a lot more fires 20 years ago. The neighborhood's safer, more diversified, and a lot of areas have come back. When I first got here, 8th Avenue between 110th Street and 116th Street was mostly vacant and rundown buildings, and now there's probably a dozen restaurants within an 8-10 block area. I don't know if that's good or bad, but they're there. I got on the fire department back in 1979. I have 38 years on the fire department, and I spent part of my early career up in the top of Harlem, up by Washington Heights. So we responded down into North Harlem from 161st Street. I was in Ladder 34, quartered with engine 84. This is a Firehouse. It has a nickname of the Fire Factory. It was given to us back in the 60s by the dispatchers. Back then, they went to fires every day, serious fires, working fires, which we call them, and they take up from a fire and they'd be going back to quarters and come across another fire and stop to fight that. And they called the dispatcher to tell them we have another working fire, and one of the dispatchers said, "What are you running up there, a fire factory?" And the guys liked the name, and it just stuck. And so the house is known throughout the world, and I think it helped join the companies together more because you don't say you're from engine 58 and ladder 26, you say you're from the fire factory. The fire department's changed a lot since I got here. We used to have rubber boots that we pulled up to protect our legs, and we had longer turnout coats. And we could move a lot quicker. At one point, with ladder companies, they let us use Lehigh boots, which were short and steel-toed and steel insole. And we could maneuver a lot quicker up the fire escapes and getting ourselves to places that we needed to be. Now, since the early 90s, every firefighter is assigned bunker gear, and it's heavy fireproof pants, and we have leather boots or rubber boots that go up to the upper calf, and we have these shorter turnout coats that are even better insulated. We also have a hood now that we pull over our heads to protect our ears and neck in fires. And then the helmet, when I first got on, the helmet was formed to your head, and it was made out of leather completely. And you had air flaps that folded out. Now, because they really weren't safe, if you got hit on something on the head, the leather, when it got dry from fire, it would just split like a watermelon. So now we have helmets that are more than twice as heavy as the old ones, but they have a fiberglass shell inside, and some of them are actually plastic and no longer leather. They have some guys still have some of the leather ones, but they're leather over plastic, so it makes it even heavier. When I first got on the fire department, we still carried life nets on the ladder companies, though I never saw it used. They were very dangerous because when you jump into a life net from 5 stories for the first time, it's easy to miss. And the guys didn't do it enough to be coordinated on how to move in position. So a lot of people were hurt, and a lot jumping into the nets, and a lot of people were hurt or killed trying to catch a person jumping in. And we also had what we call scaling ladders. They were ladders that were about 14 feet tall, and you could hook it onto the window from below and climb up the outside of the building like Spider-Man. And so it was a fairly dangerous operation, and it became impossible when they changed the windows. And we went to these more energy efficient windows, casement windows. When we used a scaling ladder, they were wood windows, and we could actually break the whole window out with the tip of the scaling ladder. And so you can go to 4 to 4. And there were even rescues years ago where guys carried it up to the tip of a 100-foot aerial and then went up a number of stories above the reach of the area to rescue people. When I first got on too, you used to see firemen riding the back of the rigs. It became too dangerous. They stopped that. We had periods of civil unrest, and it's probably even worse now with distracted drivers, where they'll follow too close. They don't pull over for the fire trucks than it was back in the day. And so they've moved everybody inside now. They have riding positions inside the rig. We also we lost one of our positions on the engine companies. When I first started, all the engine companies were an officer and 5 men. They changed that. They're supposed to, with the last contract the fireman signed, supposed to add some back. But it takes longer to get a hose line in position now. With that one less guy is actually a quarter less, because you're not using a whole 6 to stretch a line. Only 4 are involved in stretching the line, so we're down to 3 guys stretching now. And it takes more than 25% more to stretch a line. And one of the most important things with fire is getting a line into position very quickly to start the extinguishment and rescue of people. With all these plastic, it's made it more dangerous for the people in the buildings, because most of our fire deaths are caused by smoke. But also since then, all our new buildings are required to be sprinklered, and a lot of the larger commercial buildings have to retrofit and put sprinklers in. Back then, nobody had smoke detectors. Now everybody is required to have smoke detectors, and also CO detectors for carbon monoxide. We see a lot of things in our career, and some things I'll never forget. And you also lose a lot of friends. On 911, we lost Lieutenant in 58, Bobby Nagel. We considered the house lucky, and I'm sure Bobby's very happy up above that all his men were saved. He was in the hotel between the 2 towers, and they were getting ready. He was at the command post, and he had all his men in the lobby area waiting for their assignment. And when they first heard the building coming down, nobody knew what the noise was. And when they finally ran, they ran towards the lobby, and he ended up, we're trained in a collapse to go to a wall. And he ended up next to an elevator wall, and he survived the first collapse, but he was trapped. And for the first 10 or 15 minutes, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And the guys accounted for everybody. They got to him. His first concern was, do you have everybody? And they did. And then we're going to get you out. And he wanted them to get the chiefs out first that were behind him and trapped. And they were hurt, according to what was relayed to me. It took them a while to get equipment to cut them out because all the close rigs were crushed. And they had to crawl over rubble and through smoke and dust to get to rigs where they can get equipment. And it took a while, but they had finally just started cutting them out. Before that, they had gotten a search rope attached to him, a flashlight, a cigarette, and water. And he went searching in the area that he was trapped. And he came back and they started cutting, and they heard the same noise again. And he ordered the guys to get out. They went about, the two guys that were doing the cutting went to a column about 20 feet away and held on, and they were buried up to their chests in debris. We were never able to find the chief's bodies or Bobby Nagel's body in the Trade Center. We knew exactly where it was. So, there's over 1,000 people in the Trade Center that were never identified. I lost over 100 people that I worked with directly, that I knew by first name, people of every stage of my life and career, and that happened throughout the job. And you never know when you come in for a 24 what is in store for you that day. The morning of 9/11 was, I still consider, the most beautiful day of that year, weather-wise. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. We had a muggy hot spell that broke the night before, and it was cool and it felt like fall, and things changed in an instant. I was working that day. I worked the night before, and in 1993, both companies went down to the first bombing. So we all expected to go. When the tone went off for the engine, we actually put extra guys on the rig with them to help fight the fire. And that was happening all around the city because there was a change of our tours, and we had guys hanging around waiting to help out. I'm not sure exactly on the number, but there was I think 77 firefighters that weren't working that day that were killed. And that shows the dedication that the firefighters have to the neighborhoods, like Harlem. And when the tone alerts went off, we expected to go, and it was just the engine responding. And so we'll go the next alarm. But they had done a full recall, and so everybody off duty had to respond into work, whether they're on vacation, on medical leave. And so we had 100% of the guys that worked in this firehouse show up for work. And they relieved me of my command of 26 to start the initial setup for the recall here. And we had 3 battalions report in to the fire factory. About 200 firefighters responded here to be assigned. We commandeered buses, and we actually used permanent magic marker and put team numbers on their forearms, so if they were killed, we could identify them by the permanent magic marker numbers. And we started a new book to record every team. We ended up sending one bus down early with a spare rig, and those guys got down there just after the collapse, and helped in evacuating injured civilians and firefighters that were trapped. We ended up working. They kept us on the night tour. And so most firemen worked more than 40 hours. And in fact, that day when I got off in the morning, because of duties needed to be done here, and I went to see Bobby Nagel's wife and fill her in on what was happening, because we still didn't know if he was dead or alive, because we couldn't reach location. And then when I got home, my neighbor had lost her husband. He was missing. He worked on the North Tower on the 94th floor, and nobody escaped from the 94th floor. And so I went home, said hello to my wife, and went right down to console her. And she had 3 kids and was pregnant. She lived up in Ossining, New York. But yeah, we spent the next year in searching for fallen brothers and getting the fire department back into orders and into good order. I attended over 100 funerals. The Emerald Bagpipe Band went to every funeral and memorial service. Those guys did an incredible job, and they were actually assigned just to go to funerals to help the families grieve. So very stressful job, and many firefighters volunteered for assignments down to the Trade Center to search and expose themselves to a lot of dangerous dusts and chemicals, which thankfully Congress approved the Victims Compensation Fund. I've lost, since 9/11, I've lost dozens of firefighter friends, some of my best friends, to cancers. When I first got on the fire department, we had this old Scott bottle that it was kept in a suitcase, and it took a little while to put on. So the old guys that were on the fire department, the first thing they got to breathe in a fire situation was called a chemosk mask. It was it filtered out the carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and there was a color on it that changed to red when it was unsafe. But when you're in a fire situation, you couldn't see that color change. So we had a number of firefighters that were permanently injured or died from using that mask. So when we got the Scott bottle that was self-contained, it was very heavy and bulky, and it took a little while to put on, and it slowed them down, and they wanted to get in quick. And so they were called smoke eaters. They would go from window to window, taking breaths of smoke and searching for fallen people. And so it took a bit of time for the old timers to embrace the new mask. But when I got on, I was the last class that was trained on both, the old Scott bottle and the new one that was called a 4.5, and it was lighter, and it went in a harness. So when we sat down, it was right behind us on the rig, and we could strap into it before we got off the rig. So we were going in. I was lucky with my career, and it's the only reason I'm still on the fire department is because I had a little more lung protection than the guys who came on before me. So it let us get deeper into the fire and smoke to help save lives. We do a lot of service calls, I call them. People stuck in elevators. When I first came on, we didn't do many of those. They would wait for the maintenance people to come and get them out. And it took them a lot longer. We get there quicker, and sometimes there are dangerous situations with people stuck in the elevators. They put more safety on the elevators so people get stuck more, so they can't get themselves out. Somebody from the outside has to let them out. And now, since the gas explosions that we had the last 5 years in the city, Con Ed has turned over the early response to gas leaks to the fire department. So we get there quicker, and we assess the problem and turn off the gas. We had a gas explosion about 3 years ago around the corner from the Firehouse, and it was on Park Avenue and 116th Street. And 2 buildings collapsed, and a number of people were killed. And the lieutenant working that day was doing our roll call, which is a change of tours. And they heard the noise, the building shook, they went outside and saw the smoke coming across Fifth Avenue north of here. And they all jumped on the rig before they were sent by the dispatcher, and were the first ones on the scene. They got the call en route about the explosion. And a couple of guys the whole companies were honored with unit citations, and a couple of guys got recognized for rescuing a civilian in the rubble up on an upper floor. Risked life and limb to get to him. A year later, so our runs went up after that, about 500 or more in a year. And the next year we had an explosion down in the Lower East Side, and more people were killed. And the firemen almost caught in collapses themselves, jumping to aerial ladders as the building was falling. They did an incredible job down there in the Lower East Side. And after then, it's solidified that the fire department will respond right away to gas leaks. So that's a big part of our calls. We also respond, since they instituted 311, it's not well filtered. In fact, my last tour, we got called, initially it came over as an emergency, and they sent 3 engines and 2 trucks. And then they scaled it down to 1 truck to investigate. And we got there, and the person called to have the swimming pool filled up with water. So you never know what you're going to find. Here, the guys take a lot of pride in the Firehouse, and they treat it as a second home. And it's really a tight-knit group. It's kind of like being in the military, and you rely on your brothers, and we're all brothers here, or sisters now, because your life is in their hands. If they don't do their job, it makes our job more difficult and more dangerous. So it's very important. The guys train a lot here, and they're committed to doing a good job. What happened with the Trade Center, guys were going down and saying goodbye to friends of theirs because they knew it was just one way in, and they weren't coming out because of the danger. And guys would still respond when we have something like that. 26 truck actually went down to the attempted bombing at Times Square. And the first 2 companies did a great job, and 26 was there to relieve them. And everybody there risked their life and limb. If that bomb went off, Times Square would be different forever. But the guys take a lot of pride in the house, so they built a lot of the things. This is House Watch. This is where all our runs come in. It's a command center. These bricks were from collapsed buildings and donated by a former captain from the fire factory, and assembled by craftsmen that were firemen. In the old days, we used to have a lot of guys that were sand hogs, bricklayers, carpenters, plumbers. So we had a lot of guys skilled in building construction. So it actually helped with the firefighting. You knew signs better of when things were dangerous and possibly going to collapse. Over here, this used to be a hose tower. So back in the 60s and before, the outside of the hose was made with cotton. And if it got wet and stayed wet, it would become moldy and it would rot. And so you had more burst lengths that made it more dangerous. So after every fire, you had, it went the length of the firehouse, you would have to hang the hose to dry and then put new hose on the rig. And now with a nylon hose, you don't have to do that. This is dedicated to firefighters that worked here. There are a number of firefighters that were killed line of duty. Bobby Nagel, who died at the Trade Center, there's a photo up here. Larry Fitzpatrick was killed up in North Harlem on 151st Street, rescuing another fireman when the rope broke. And we actually have his nephew, Kevin Fitzpatrick, is one of my senior men. And then we have former firemen that were killed at the Trade Center. Patty Brown was a captain of Ladder 3, and he was assigned here as a probie. Charlie Roberto did 6 months here as a new lieutenant being trained to be a lieutenant. Jack Fanning was in charge of hazmat operations that day at the Trade Center, and he was a highly decorated lieutenant in the fire department. And then we have other guys on the other side here. Chris Angledrum was the first civil service member killed in Iraq, and he was here for a year being trained in a busier firehouse. And then in front of him we had a probie that was killed changing a flat tire on the side of the road, and a car ran off the road and T-boned him. That was Ryan Duryea. And then Ray Downey was a lieutenant here in two of the companies, and he was the chief of rescue services then, and he was killed. And Tommy O'Hagan was a fireman here and had since gotten promoted to lieutenant. And then we also honor guys that did 20 years in the firehouse. They get a plaque here because it's a very busy place. So a lot of people don't last their full career. They get injured first. And because guys are so into the fire department and they learn the job, many of the guys get promoted to officers. This year alone, we're having 7 guys promoted out of this firehouse. So we'll be training new guys. In the last class, we got 4 guys assigned to the firehouse. And you could tell them, we say they have a pumpkin patch. They have a patch on their helmet to let us know they're a junior firefighter, and it's orange. So we call it a pumpkin patch. And then the centennials, everybody that worked here on the 100-year anniversary, they have their names listed. In fact, here's one of the probies right now. This is his father was on the job, a captain up in Harlem in 35 engine for a number of years. Here goes the ladder, and they're just coming back from a run, and they're going out again, just to show you how busy we are. The firehouse kitchen is really the heart and soul of the firehouse. This is where we do most of our drilling. Oh, and on the way there, you look up to the right, these are what we call unit citations. These are awarded to the companies for serious fires where they make rescues as a team or individually. And so this shows how busy we are around here. And the kitchen, this was restored again with bricks from collapsed buildings, and to give it a more welcome atmosphere, I think. And we have guys would when they get promoted, they give something to the firehouse, or they retire, or maybe when they have 30 years. So they'll chip in money and they'll donate to have a table made. So this was made by someplace up in Woodstock, New York. And it's got a plaque over here to the guys that donated it. And so their names will always be here. And then the stained glass, again, guys who are promoted or retired got together. You can see their photos here. This is over 20 years ago that this was made and donated. And then we have a number of pictures with that really tell the history. one of the things that helps us with all the stress of fire department is competitive sports. So it also increases the camaraderie in the house. You know, so we actually in 1 year we won the trophy for the best softball team on the job, the best football team, and the best hockey team. And you can see a number of pictures here are sports related. And then we've had a number of guys who served in the reserves and were activated. So we had one member of 58 Engine was over in Afghanistan and doing fire department work. He was responding, rescuing injured soldiers. And the company used to have a tiller to make turns on the tighter streets. And you know, so this was guys posing for a picture on St. Paddy's Day. And then this is a firehouse that that they shot. Elmo visits a firehouse.
Breakfast. Eggs. Delicious and healthy.
So that was shot here in 2002. So Maria from Sesame Street came here in Elmo, and they filmed all day in the firehouse. And some of the crew was commenting because we kind of had a slow day, and so we were watching what was going on. And they said, "What do you guys do? What do you do?" You know, and they brought all the food that day, which wasn't enough for the firemen, but in that afternoon we had a serious fire in Schomburg Towers, and a couple of firemen got burned, and they kind of kept quiet after that. You know, that we're an insurance policy. And you can see here the heart and soul of the firehouse, the guy's cooking.
Bacon, mac and cheese. All right.
Yeah, we do all our own cooking. Nobody does it for us. And we have some very good meals here, and once in a while we have questionable meals. We also lose a lot of meals from runs. You're eating overcooked and dried out food. And everybody chips in to divide up the cost. You know, so it's, you know, the city doesn't buy our meals, we do. And then this is a room that the guys built to cool off. It's got AC in it. During those hot 100 degrees days, it's very important, and it helps. It also helps the guys forget about some things, relax their mind a little. They did a heart study here before 911, and they found just a tone alert going off, our heart rates would jump up to 140 beats per minute, almost double. And then we have pictures of all the guys that work here in 58 engine and 26 truck. You know, the senior guys, it goes by order. So the captain, Hugh Smith, Tom Canine, Tim Garrity, his father was a lieutenant in the truck back in the 80s, 90s into 2000. Bobby Canales, the senior man here in the engine. He's here around 25 years. And I can't forget Mike McGraw, since I'm saying all the officers' names. He might get mad at me. This is another thing that was donated, done by the wood carver up in Woodstock, and just to beautify the place a little. Guys take a lot. We do all our own cleaning here. Nobody comes in and does it for us, and the guys take a lot of pride in that. This is a truck. Me with my oversized front piece there. That's a gag. John Barry, Ed Poley, who was working the gas explosion, and Kevin Cassidy, and my senior guys, Jimmy McNamara, Mike Corrigan, and Kevin Fitzpatrick, whose uncle was killed when the rope broke, rescuing the other firefighter. And we're proud of our history. This is a shot back from the 70s of all the guys that, the 3 companies that work here. Back in, when Harlem was really burning, they had 2 ladder companies responding out of here. They would take turns because they were so busy. No, it was not the level of the South Bronx, but Harlem was burning. It's just real estate was always more valuable because of the access to subway and bus lines. So, and the Firehouse, because the amount of runs are located a little closer together than in the Bronx, so a lot of those buildings were rehabbed. So if you go around Harlem, you'll see that there's old law tenements and new law tenements that are now joined into 1 or 2, from up to 5 buildings into 1 building. And those were vacant buildings that were rehabbed. In fact, over by between 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue on 114th Street, those were vacant, I think, twice, and they were rehabbed twice, and they're in the process of being rehabbed the second time. So the south side of the street is done. If you go and walk down that street, you can see the work going on the north side of the street. And you know, they really never gave up on Harlem, where I think the South Bronx, like a lot of people, just walked away from it until a large part of it was vacant, and then they kind of mothballed it and redid it all at once. But we have some areas that were pretty much totally gutted. Over by between Park and Madison Avenue, north side of 117th to 118th Street, there are only a couple of buildings left on that whole block, and they built 3 family homes there that are owned by the person living in there, and they rent out apartments, and they take more pride in ownership. And I think that's helped a lot in Harlem. Is a lot of co-ops where you know, they've done some new buildings that they have low-income co-ops where you can get financial help in building and in buying the apartment, and the people have more pride in it. You can see that when we go into those buildings. They, you know, unfortunately, it's not across the board. There's a number of people who don't take pride in their apartments, and they get a little overrun. I've seen some places that just amaze me, with the filth and the dirt and flies and garbage. You know, there's a number of buildings that have rats in the apartments. We've even had rats run in here recently that we're combating right now. But you know, if they don't have food, they won't move in, and so people need to clean up after themselves. But most of the calls we get for help, the water leaks and other problems, some of the electrical fires that are started by water leaks, we're going in apartments that are well kept, that the people take a lot of pride. They may have lived there for over 50 years, but the neighbors above might have gotten careless, and water comes down and it gets into the electric, and sometimes they're afraid to go up and knock on the door, so they let us do that. And we respond a little quicker than housing does to help shut down the water and alleviate the problem and make it a little safer. I'm 61 years old. There's not too many people left on the fire department, especially on the front line, where you're still running into the buildings with the first 2 units. And you have to retire the day you turn 65. So the most I could do is 3.5 years. But this is a very tough job. Last summer was very hot. I weighed about 20 pounds more, and I felt carrying that weight. We were short manpower, so I was asked to work overtime, a lot more than I'm being asked now. And my house was uncovered with lieutenants, so I would work in my company. So I didn't get much of a break while I was working. So it was very fatiguing, and I had to get myself again in better shape to do another couple of years. No, I don't see myself staying past 40 years. In a year and a half, I'll have 40 years on the fire department. I talked about leaving after I had 20 years in the company, which is this September, officially. And my daughter said 39 years is bad luck. You need to stay for an even number. So I might shoot for that. And thankfully, the guys like me. They don't want me to leave. And a lot of them, it's all they know, because I've been here for 20 years. Even in the truck, the senior man has been here less than 17 years. So I think they've gotten used to me. And I like to think I'm doing a good job.